Hello, and welcome to the online presentation about the Georgia Professional Standards Commission's Code of Ethics. I'm Nancy Rimler, Associate Professor of English Education in the Department of Middle Grades and Secondary Education, Georgia Southern University. In this video, we will examine ethical policies Georgia's teachers and teacher candidates are expected to follow. Many of those policies are also associated with Georgia laws. So here at the beginning of this presentation, I want everyone to understand that I am not a lawyer. In this presentation, I'm not giving legal advice. Please don't interpret this presentation as legal advice. If you would like legal advice, as student members of PAGE, you have access to legal advice through the PAGE legal staff members. So by giving this presentation, I'm offering practical advice on how to comply with state ethical standards which are required in order for you to succeed in your practicum experience. Because I'm not a lawyer and because I do not work for the Professional Standards Commission, I have consulted a number of reliable sources to inform this presentation, and those sources are listed at the end of these slides. Okay, now with all of those disclaimers out of the way, let's get started. The Georgia Professional Standards Commission publishes a list of rules that comprise its professional code of ethics, and you can access that list of rules at the URL in this slide. I have also provided a copy of those rules in our Folio e-classroom for our practicum experience. You should read these rules before you begin your practicum experience in a public school. But also take note that this list of rules is the minimum standard for the state's ethical behaviors. Many school districts have their own ethical codes that do comply with this list, but also make their expectations more specific. For instance, this state list of rules says that if an educator is aware of a breach of the ethical code, that educator must report the violation as soon as possible, but no later than 90 days from the date that the educator became aware of the violation. However, an individual school district might have its own policy that says an educator must report the violation within 14 days. That 14-day time frame is still in compliance with the state code, but it's shorter and more specific. So always read the system code of ethics to make sure that you understand the most specific guidelines to follow. Knowing the code helps you to avoid problems. Georgia's Ethical Code for Educators consists of 10 standards that categorize the system's expectations of teachers. We will address these 10 standards and then offer a few examples of ethical violations and the consequences of those violations. Before we start that list of rules, though, I want to clarify one important thing which I learned from Sean DeVetter, staff attorney for PAGE. If you are ever investigated by the Professional Standards Commission because of a possible ethics violation, you have the right to have an attorney present. The PSC's general process is to send the educator a letter that essentially says you're being investigated by the PSC for an ethics violation. The letter identifies what that violation is, and it includes the consequence that they recommend. The letter includes a passage that says if you agree with this violation and if you agree with our recommended sanction, then sign here and return this letter. And the letter also includes a passage that says if you would like to speak to an investigator to explain your side of the story, you may call this phone number. Attorney DeVetter urges you not to sign that letter and not to phone the investigator. As a student member of PAGE, you have the right to an attorney, and it will be in your best interest to consult with that attorney first. The attorney will assist you in putting together a statement in response to the charge of ethics violations. Okay, now let's explain the standards as outlined in the PSC's Code of Ethics. The first standard is legal compliance. Very simply put, this standard says that educators must obey the law. So if you just do that, you'll be okay. But when new teachers learn about this standard, they often have questions about the what ifs. So let's look more specifically at what this standard expects of teachers. First of all, as I said a second ago, don't get arrested. If you avoid getting arrested, then all will be well. But if you do get arrested and if you're convicted for any of the following reasons, you have to report them. If you get arrested and convicted of a felony, misdemeanors of moral turpitude, or any drug-related crimes. So look carefully about what Standard 1 says about convictions. The code defines a conviction as being found guilty of one of those crimes or pleading no contest to one of those crimes. Again, if you get arrested and you have any questions about whether you were arrested for a felony or whether you meet the criteria for a conviction, as a student member of PAGE, you have the right to consult an attorney for that clarification. Most people scratch their heads at the term moral turpitude, and because I'm not an attorney, I'm going to use the language that's published on the Professional Standards Commission's website. Turpitude, in its ordinary sense, involves the idea of inherent baseness, vileness, shameful wickedness, depravity with respect to a person's duty to another or to society in general. In its legal sense, it includes everything contrary to justice, honesty, modesty, or good morals. There was a court case called Ramsey v. State that said that a crime involving moral turpitude is one that is wrong in itself rather than wrong because it is prohibited by law. By this definition, moral turpitude is generally understood obvious wrongness. Now, this definition could spark all kinds of philosophical debates about rightness and wrongness, and which rights and wrongs are obvious and which are not. Fortunately, the state of Georgia provides a list of crimes that involve moral turpitude. They are fraud or false pretenses in obtaining something of value, larceny or theft by taking, larceny after trust, which is stealing something by way of deceit, murder, soliciting prostitutes, voluntary manslaughter, sale of narcotics or other illegal drugs, pattern of failure to file federal tax returns in years that taxes are due, criminal issuance of bad checks, and making a false report of a crime. So the safest route to following the ethical code is to not commit these crimes. But if you get arrested for them, or if you are convicted of them, or plead no contest to them, report them to your administrator and fast. Because you'll see a little bit later that delaying your report can come back to bite you in the behind. Here are some examples of actual violations of Standard 1. An educator stole gasoline from the school system, which was valued at more than $1,000. A teacher forged prescription slips and had them filled at the pharmacy to get drugs. Another teacher distributed child pornography. All of those crimes were crimes of moral turpitude and resulted in sanctions ranging from suspensions of the license to getting the license revoked entirely. Standard 2 of the Ethical Code has to do with the teacher's conduct with students. Educators must always maintain professional relationships with students inside and beyond the classroom. Relationships should not extend beyond professional boundaries. Of course, those boundaries can get crossed in different ways depending on the ages of students. Attorney DeVetter extends this guideline to educators. Do not hit them, kick them, smack them, slap them, staple them, tape them, lock them in the closet, throw anything at them, or sleep with them. I think that's good advice. I would add that you should not do anything that even looks or sounds like those things. Here are some examples of how those boundaries have actually been crossed. Romantic relationships have happened multiple times with students. Just don't get romantically involved with the student, even if the student is 18 years old or older. A student, regardless of age, is considered a student until August 31st, the year of graduation. Other examples: a superintendent of schools who was aware of her daughter, a school counselor, having a romantic relationship with a student, failed to report that relationship. So this was an example of being aware of an ethics violation and not reporting it. There was a school principal who was advised that a student had a cell phone video of a student performing a sex act on another. The principal waited 3 days to confiscate the phone. That also was a violation of conduct with students. An educator failed to properly supervise a group of students, and that lapse in supervision resulted in the sexual assault of a kindergarten student by a third grader. And finally, an educator provided alcoholic beverages which were consumed by students at her residence. All of those examples are instances of an educator failing to stay within the boundaries of a professional relationship with students. Maintaining your professional boundaries with students will require that you be especially vigilant about what information you put online and what others might photograph or record and put online. Social networking sites are easy ways for students or parents and community stakeholders to discover behaviors you might think are private. So follow these guidelines for social media. Don't send friend requests to your students, and don't follow your students' social media feeds. Don't accept your students' friend requests. Keep your social media accounts private. Don't post anything on a website that you would not post on the front door of the school. And on your social media accounts, do not complain about work, do not complain about students, do not disparage students, and do not disparage colleagues or the schools or your supervisors. Another thing to keep in mind about social media accounts: you might have all of your settings private, but if you put information online, I promise you somebody else has access to it. There are ways of hacking into accounts. There are ways of getting into your information even though you've done your due diligence. So be very mindful of what you put online, even when you have set your settings to be as private as you can. I'll add another word of caution about ethical behavior in social media. You are not the only person who puts information about you online. And for that reason, because teachers are very much in the public eye, it would be smart for you to be very careful of when and where you might get photographed or recorded. Other people might record something that you said or something that you wrote. Others might take photos or videos of you and post that information online without your knowledge. And so always be mindful that because you are a representative of the public schools and very much in the public eye, information about you can get posted online without your awareness. Okay, moving on to Standard 3. This standard regards alcohol and drugs. Obviously, the standard overlaps in some ways with Standard 1 and Standard 2 because some alcohol-related and drug-related behaviors are illegal and some of them involve minors. But let's look more specifically at what this standard expects of educators. An educator shall refrain from the use of alcohol or illegal or unauthorized drugs during the course of professional practice. As Attorney DeVetter says, don't get drunk and then come to school, and don't get drunk at school. I will add to this advice: don't get high, don't get stoned and then come to school, and don't get high or stoned at school. Educators can find themselves in sticky situations on Friday evenings, so please be careful about that. It's very easy at the end of a work week to have a few drinks, for instance, before going to a football game. But football games are school-related events, so if you're intoxicated at a high school football game, you're in violation of Standard 3. Some examples of Standard 3 violations: there was a teacher who was under the influence of alcoholic beverages while on campus. Another educator consumed 1 alcoholic beverage per night after hours during 3 nights while serving as a chaperone on an 8-day school trip to Italy. And this example just illustrates the importance of your behavior as a representative of the school, no matter where you are. The laws might have been different in another country, but the code of ethics does not change. And so, because that educator was supervising students and because that educator was technically on duty, that educator violated Standard 3. Regarding this first example, Attorney DeVetter offered this advice for teachers. At any point, the school might ask you to take a drug test or a breathalyzer test. You can refuse that test, but if you do, keep in mind that while the school cannot force you to take a test, the school can terminate your employment. Standard 4 has to do with honesty. Educators are expected to be honest as employees of the school system, and two very common violations of this standard have to do with being honest about why you're taking leave and about reporting violations. So be honest about taking leave. If you take a sick day when you're not sick, you're in violation of Standard 4. If your school asks you whether you took a sick day when you're not sick and you lie about it, then you're further in violation of Standard 4. Again, keep in mind that you are very much in the public eye. So someone could recognize your behavior and report you. If the school asks you, for instance, if you were intoxicated at a football game and you say no when you really were, then you're in violation of Standard 4. Other violations of Standard 4 might be saying that you participated in professional development opportunities when you didn't. If you falsely represented your qualifications for a job, or if you manipulated students' grades so that they didn't accurately reflect their performance. And we'll discuss that last one more specifically when we get to Standard 10. But for now, let's take a look at some actual examples of violations of this ethical standard. There was a teacher who gave her school system a doctor's excuse for sick days when she actually went on a trip with her daughter and husband. Another example, a teacher changed the grades of 12 students in 4 subjects with no documentation supporting the grade changes. The teacher said that it was for the benefit of the students. And then thirdly, a teacher fabricated her IEP paperwork by cutting and pasting signatures from other documents, then photocopying them to conceal that digital doctoring. That is a violation of the honesty code. And Standard 5 has to do with public funds and property. You cannot take anything that belongs to your school and use it for your personal gain. With the COVID pandemic, we've seen a lot of issues about that lately because the teachers and the students were required to go home, teach and learn remotely. But you need to be sure that you are using the school property for school use and not for your personal gain. So for your personal purposes, you cannot use the school's computers or tablets. You can't use their instructional texts or documents. You can't use their white erase boards. You can't use their shelves or their file cabinets. So if you want to take home a school file cabinet and keep your personal files in it at home, that's a violation of Standard 5. You cannot use the school's property for your personal gain. Now, we have seen a lot of issues lately regarding online tutoring to make money. There's nothing keeping a teacher from tutoring students online. But remember that you cannot use the school's laptop computer to do your private tutoring online, and you cannot use the school's instructional documents, textbooks, and materials for your private tutoring online. This standard also applies to uses of funds generated through fundraisers. So if you're in charge of a school fundraiser, you should have a plan for how you will collect that money and keep that money secure. You should account for all of the money that you collect each day. You should turn in that money every day. I can't emphasize that enough. Every day. And have documentation of all of your records and all of your processes. In the past, it was acceptable for teachers to collect all the money from a fundraiser and deposit it into their own bank accounts and then give one check for the total amount to the school. That just made the process simpler, but that decision making is no longer allowed. Okay, so here are some specific examples of actual Standard 5 violations. There was a teacher who took the school's tractor home and used it to mow his own fields. Unfortunately, on the way back to the school, when he was returning the tractor broke down, and so that's how the school realized that he was using school property. That kind of thing is not allowed. Don't borrow the school's lawnmowers. There was an academic coach program manager who authorized the payment of state funds to employ her own relatives, to make unallowable expenses, and to cover the cost of her own graduate school. Certainly that's not allowed. And then there was a teacher who rented the school auditorium to community members and then kept the money for his own private use. That is not an allowed use of state monies. And so we will pause the presentation here to keep this video from going too long. Once you finish this video, if you would please click on the Part 2 video, we will cover standards 6 through 10 of this presentation. Thank you.